Hello, everyone. You're listening to For Those We Lost. I'm your host, Jennifer Sullivan. Thank you for being here. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com. Or you can go to the website, forthosewelostpodcast.com, and click on the contact button, and you can reach me that way as well. In this show, people share their stories of losing a loved one to COVID. Every story you hear in this show is full of heartbreak, grief, loss, and frustration, but they are also full of love and hope. We talk about how we are coping, we talk about how to keep the memory of our loved ones alive, and how isolating our grief is as the world wants to move on. You'll hear us talk a little bit about the vaccine and politics, and you may not agree, but I hope you'll keep listening because each person who shares their story on the show has experienced profound grief over the loss of a loved one. And that's something we will all experience. We all love someone, we will all lose someone we love, and we will all grieve. These are the stories of those we lost to COVID. Thanks for being here with me today, everyone. I've got a great show coming up for you. Today I'm joined by Cathy from Houston. Cathy lost her dad last year in January 2021. In this episode, Cathy tells her dad's story from the moments that her family realized they had COVID to her father's last minutes. She also talks about losing her mom in 2015 and how that loss made losing her father more poignant, but also how it made all the moments they shared together more special. For context, we recorded this episode on November 9th, 2021. Cathy's father's name is Steve Wright. He was featured in an art exhibit by artist Joni Zavitstanos at the Health Museum in Houston in October 2021 because he was a pilot, and after Cathy's mom passed away, her dad flew Angel flight missions, getting patients to and from their much-needed medical treatments in Houston. The information on the art exhibit and Angel flights is in the show notes below. And with that, I'd like to welcome Cathy to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I usually start my shows by asking about March of 2020, because that's really when all of this started. And so what I'd like for you to do is just take a few minutes and describe what that was like for your family and the changes that you made amongst your group of people that you interact with, like your dad and your kids and all of that in March of 2020.
Oh, that was such a seminal moment, wasn't it, for everybody? I think it's one of those 9/11 moments where everyone can remember where they were when they realized that everything was going to be or was becoming different. I can remember that in my family too. There was the last normal day, the last day that things were the way they were before they weren't anymore. I think for us, that was March 13th. It was in the middle of our spring break that we had taken a small trip with my dad to Missouri with the kids, and it wasn't a full week, just a few days. And as the news was unfolding while we were there, we were contemplating what to do and what this would mean. We were watching a huge event in Houston, the livestock show and rodeo. That's an annual event, be changed and then canceled, and it started to feel like this is very real. Within days of getting back to Houston and realizing we had a major problem on our hands, and my husband's school district was talking about extending spring break until they could make a determination on what the right thing to do with the schools was. We started purchasing masks. We were tracking, following numbers both internationally and in the US, and feeling this sense of foreboding or inescapability of COVID. We saw my dad so regularly, but we started seeing him even more. When he would come up to our house, he would stay for 2 or 3 nights in a row instead of just one night. And and we were asking him, please don't go to the grocery store. Let us do that for you. Let us either deliver groceries, or we'll buy enough for both of our families for the times that you're back home. We were buying him a mask when we bought our masks, and I remember N95s were hard or impossible to find. Trying to help find them for one of my friends who is a physician, and thinking how utterly nonsensical it felt that people in the medical industry could not be protected while they're there treating others. Having
Mhm.
had this long medical history with my mom and an immense respect for everyone who took care of her over those decades, to imagine people risking their very lives without proper protection was unthinkable to us. I can still remember how shocking that felt.
Yeah. Yeah, and take a minute or two and talk about your mom because that's definitely part of this story with you and your dad.
It is. Oh gosh. It is. It's all woven so sweetly together. My mom, her name is Jeanette, my child, my first child, my daughter. Her middle name is Jeanette. She was born just a few months after my mom died. My mom had a long medical scenario play out that started in her late 40s with a blood clot in her liver that led to a need for a liver transplant that turned into a massive medical trauma after her transplant. She was she was in Houston post liver transplant, post acute respiratory distress syndrome, in a medically induced coma when a tropical storm wreaked havoc on our city, Tropical Storm Allison, in June of 2001. My mom's life was critically in the balance when the Texas Medical Center lost all power as a result of the flooding from this storm. And in a day that none of us will ever forget, she was carried down 9 flights of stairs at her hospital, in one of the largest medical centers in the country, and airlifted by Coast Guard helicopter to another hospital. It was so tense and second by second, but she recovered, and she did so with incredible help and with encouragement from us, from her family. We couldn't be anywhere but near her. And she came back from that, but the 15 years that followed included a switch to a bone marrow cancer. Her disorder in her blood changed, and just a genetic terrible roll of the dice that led to a need for constant blood transfusions. Her decreased immune system required constant monitoring, and we were at the whim of pneumonias that showed up over and over again. And although her bone marrow cancer did not become leukemia as we had been cautioned to expect, it did eventually, myelofibrosis, take her life. Her organs ultimately could not withstand the work required of healing pneumonias, of receiving iron laden blood transfusions. And in January of 2015, her body gave up, and
Mm.
we lost her. And though looking back now, it seems so evident when you look at the pictures and when you look at the statistics and the data from her doctor appointments that this was coming, it was still shocking to us. And the aftermath was a ground zero, one that I now recognize in the loss of my dad.
Mhm.
So after my mom's death, though, we were a tight knit family before we were even tighter knit upon her passing, and certainly it was different because I was pregnant, and there were a whole set of feelings. I had wished so much that she would get to meet my child, um, and I felt this huge need to pay attention and sense her because motherhood was something I felt that she did so well, and I was really looking forward to doing that together. But in her earthly absence, I wanted to sense her advice and her feeling and her approval from another place. I really looked for and felt for her, and she did shine down.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. And so you became a tighter knit family, and your dad became just a huge part of your family and your life with your kids and being a grandpa.
He did. My dad, we called him our family oak, and he always was the patriarch. And in Texas, oak trees are something incredible. They're something fierce. There's a great amount of the state history wrapped up in oak trees, and he he embodied that. He lived that. He was a grandfather to my both of my brother's children. My my one niece was born just less than 2 months before my mom died, and when my daughter was born, it unleashed a new chapter of his grandparenting because he was doing it alone. And I think he felt that he needed to be more to me personally and to my child because of the loss of my mom. I kept telling him, you don't have to be both Grammy and Grampy. Just you as yourself is more than enough. But he really worked hard to all of these grandbabies in his life to be both, to be more, to be a force for good. I always said for him, love was a verb, and it was.
Hmm. So take us to the fall and into November and December of 2020,
Yeah,
because that's go ahead and take us there.
that's where everything that's where everything really changed. I felt that we were addressing this pandemic responsibly, thoughtfully, taking important precautions. I stopped going into any stores. My husband was a designated grocery person if we did any groceries that weren't picked up. My dad, we asked him to curtail and limit any interaction as much as possible. My daughter, instead of being on campus for kindergarten, was doing virtual kindergarten from home, and my dad was the one leading her in her lessons when I would dash off to take my younger child to preschool 2 days a week. My dad loved being on her Zoom meetings. I can still see him leaning into the camera and waving at the teacher and the other students. And
Oh.
sometimes not realizing that he was on the screen, which is just it's adorable. And my daughter Amelia, she adored that too. So we were careful, measured. Somehow, I still don't know how, and I'm not sure it's ever going to matter if I know. But COVID came to our lives. The last bit of normalcy was the very beginning of December, where we were talking about Christmas plans. We made the first batch of Christmas cookies, which was something I always shared with my mom and my dad. And in my mom's death, my dad took over. We did it together. We were driving around the neighborhood looking at Christmas lights. We wore our masks and took a Polar Express train ride that we took every year. My dad was a huge train fan and very passionate about it. We stuck with that tradition, and that right there was the last bit of good and normal and hopeful, because on my 41st birthday, December 19th of 2020, my 3-year-old, no, my 2-year-old son, he was 2 at the time, my 2-year-old son and I were both diagnosed with COVID.
Mm.
I had ceased to smell or taste my coffee that morning. The first person I called was my dad, who had just left my house. And I said, I'm nervous. I'm scared. I'm afraid this means it's here. And I'm afraid it means you've got it too. You need to go get tested. And he said, you've had allergies and sinus issues for the last several weeks. Surely this could just be that. And this deep pit in my stomach told me otherwise. And I begged him to go get tested, and he did. And so on the 19th, Luca and I were positive. On the 20th, my dad was positive. And my husband was positive, and it was awful. We were so sick. My dad seemed to be better off than we were at first. And he was offering to come to our house and help us because my husband Mark and I were both so ill. Trying to take care of both of our children while that ill was a huge feat. And my dad said, I've got some gastrointestinal issues, but I think I can make the 45-minute drive to your house, and I can be there, and I can be extra hands. He always wanted to be extra hands, whether it was changing a diaper or taking one of my kids outside to get a breath of fresh air when they were melting down or sad or frustrated. He would always say, it's my turn. And I remember him saying that in December, it's my turn. It's my turn. You guys are sick. Let me help, despite the fact that he was also sick. He made it to my house on December 22nd, and he was so hopeful. He said, I feel so much better just being here, just being in your presence. My son was climbing on his back, and they were they were playing, and I was bringing him tea and Gatorade, checking on him. We were all in a rough space, but we were together.
Yeah.
And that's just it. That was the last day right there, because early the morning of December 23rd, he appeared next to my bed, and it was such a surreal moment. And he was holding his pulse ox, which he wore in the cockpit. He's been a pilot for over 50 years. And he said, I need you to call 911. And I was groggy and COVID headed. And I said, well, hold on, let me call Brad, my brother. And he said, no, call the ambulance first, and then you can call Brad. And to hear that, my most risk averse father, the most careful pilot, so sure of how critical this was terrifying. I called the ambulance, and I called my brother, and it almost looked like maybe he wasn't going to need help. The ambulance said, your oxygenation's not that bad. The paramedic was so kind. And then he asked if my dad had ever had atrial fibrillation, and he had in 2014 due to dehydration from a stomach virus, and was hospitalized a couple of nights for it. So we shared that information, and the paramedic said, well, let me make sure you're not an AFib right now. And he hooked my dad up on my front porch, and he said, you're an AFib. Let's go get in the ambulance. Let's go. I will never forget watching my dad in that ambulance in his pumpkin colored button down shirt and his navy pants. And I was hugging him, reaching for his capable hands and saying, I love you. Let me know as soon as you get there. We'll do anything we can to help. And then I said, I'm sorry, because I'm afraid that my family gave it to him and not the other way around, even if there's no way to know that. I said, I'm sorry. And he said, no, no, don't be sorry. I love you. We're going to get through this. It's going to be okay. And the doors closed, and the ambulance drove down my street. I could see my neighbor across the street looking on, probably because seeing a bunch of ambulance lights in the early morning is unusual. I can remember seeing his face. His face was so concerned, it mirrored how my heart felt. And I was still so my brain felt so slowed, and it's hard to explain, like coated with some surface because of COVID that it felt unreal. I felt to myself, this can't be happening. This isn't actuality. I'm not really here right now.
Yeah.
And so he was taken to the same hospital where both of my children were born. My brother, my sister-in-law, my husband, and I were all on the phone on my front porch, while the paramedic was tending to my dad, and we had a deep conversation about which hospital, and a sign that things were out of control. There was a terrible spread in my county, my local area at that time. One of the biggest hospitals, the paramedic said, "Don't even think about it. They're full. They're not taking anybody. He can't go to Memorial Hermann." And so they suggested a couple of regional hospitals, and they suggested St. Luke's, all in near proximity. St. Luke's treated me when I had pulmonary embolism situation in 2007. Again, it's where my kids were born. We felt safe and hopeful sending him there. And that's where he went. And he was situated with some oxygen. They immediately started him on remdesivir. He was hopeful that day, the 23rd. I remember him saying, "I'm glad I'm here. We did the right thing. This was the right time to act. I'm confident that we are where we need to be to fight this. Cathy, we're going to have a story to tell. We're going to come through this. We're going to have something to be thankful for." I know we are. And I could do nothing but agree with him. I believed it. I could do nothing but believe that we would prevail. He was in the hospital on Christmas Eve and on Christmas Day, and those are hugely important holidays in our family. We're always together, particularly with my mom gone. We always folded my dad into our celebrations on Christmas Eve. My kids were missing him immensely. We were doing FaceTime conversations. He's such a forward-thinking and loving, giving person that he had brought along one wrapped gift for each person in our family that he wanted them to open on Christmas that we could
Oh.
do on a video call. And we did. And he seemed himself. He seemed tired, but he was still himself. And later in that day, my brother, did a similar video call and observed, he thought my dad was struggling to take more breaths at the end of these conversations. Something I didn't want to see or hear him say, but as I look back at the photos that I was taking, I can see it too.
Yeah. So you were screen capturing your FaceTime call.
I was. Something
Yeah.
inside me told me,
Yep.
take these pictures. Take these pictures now.
I did
Sending
that too. Yeah.
how can we not, right? There's
Uh-huh.
that sense of something slipping from us quickly, and like humans, we want to control it, don't we?
Mhm. Yeah.
So that was the 25th. The 26th, I can remember he seemed to be struggling more. He was needing to be on the BiPAP, which my mom had been on many times. That is a loud, intense machine. It's meant to force air into your lungs where it is needed. It is meant to stave off the need for being on a ventilator. It's a last ditch resort before another last ditch resort. And I remember speaking to his nurses. The hospital was so busy. It's hard to get those updates, and you want to stay out of their way. They're having to get in full PPE to go into the room,
Mhm.
and they're warning us. We feel that he may need more assistance, more observation. There's a high probability we need to send him to the ICU so that there can be someone around him more frequently, able to respond and help him more. That felt that felt grave, but it also felt oddly comfortable because so much of my mom's medical life involved an intensive care unit, and it was a place that we knew well. And the care in ICU is like nothing else. The people whose hearts are for working in the ICU are like nothing else. And I thought, this feels bad, but this is the very best place for him to be right now. This gives me hope that we can help him. And then it was just textbook. Upon entry to the ICU, one of the very first conversations with his nurse was that they were seeing him head the direction of needing a ventilator. They wanted to prepare us for that. The second day in the ICU, the decision was made that he needed to go on the ventilator. My brother and I were able to see him on a FaceTime call before that happened. He was he was somewhat himself, but not fully himself. And all I could think was, we have to do this. We did this for my mom multiple times. She came back. He has to come back. I said, please stay. Please stay. We need you. Please fight. It's never been more important. Please, please stay. Not long after the ventilator was included in his care, we received a phone call from the hospital, and I figured it was an update to let us know how that was going. But the tenor of the voice of the physician's assistant who was speaking with us, who turned out to be one of our angels in this process, Megan, it was serious. She said, your dad has had a heart attack following ventilation. This is not unusual. We have multiple COVID patients go through this. We already have him on blood thinners. He's not stable enough to go to the cath lab for us to learn more about the cause of this heart attack. We have him as anticoagulated as possible, but COVID puts you in a hypercoagulable state. And we think it would be good if you would come up tonight to see him in case he can't make it through tonight.
Mm.
And that was huge because no one could go to the hospital. That element of this was so hard. We were by my mom's side in all of her hospitals and at MD Anderson for her cancer treatment all the time.
Yeah.
We shared in that. I feel like that cheering section was what allowed her to prevail perhaps more times than she might have otherwise. That's why we counted on her rallying and why it felt shocking when she died. I had worried all throughout 2020 that if my dad contracted COVID and went to the hospital, he would be isolated from us. We couldn't be next to him, ask more questions, better deeply understand what was happening and what would happen. And that's exactly what occurred in my family.
Yeah. Yeah, that isolation. And they are just there going through it alone. It's so wonderful that they wanted you to come in.
So wonderful. Such a hallmark of who these people actually are as caregivers, as people who understand the human condition. They they said, "Listen, we think healing is tied to the proximity of loved ones. We want your dad to have every chance. If you and your brothers understand, the risks of coming in, you'll need to be in full PPE. If you understand them and are willing to take them, we want you to be able to come in to see him." And we
Mhm.
did. That was December 27th. We we surrounded him. I couldn't conceive that this was it. It was the first time I was seeing him in 4 days. I told my younger brother when we were in the car together, I said, he can't die tonight. He can't die. I don't feel that this is what's going to happen. I don't believe it. I can't believe it. And my brothers and I surrounded each other. We were a unit like never before. And our knees were touching in the waiting room as we had to have these impossible discussions about do not resuscitate orders and what you do when someone codes when they have COVID and you're worried about collapsing a lung, which is recovering from COVID. It was surreal. It was horrible. And so when the sun came up the next morning on December 28th and he hadn't died, I felt such a surge of hope. I spoke with that angel, his PA Megan, early in the morning that he was out of atrial fibrillation or out of the heart attack rhythm, sorry, and into something called atrial flutter, and that they felt that for the moment he was hanging in there and we were going to get him as stable as possible so that the ventilator could do its work and help heal him. The days that followed were not a story of stability. They were a story of chasing stability. It was it was so much up and so much down. There were moments of we're trying to get neurological feedback and we're not happy with what we're seeing. We're concerned there may have been a massive stroke and
Mm.
that there won't be recovery from that. We can't get a CAT scan because he's not stable enough to do so. We're drinking these updates like water in a desert, writing them down, sharing them with loved ones, paying attention to oxygen numbers, which were familiar from my mom's medical journey, but that I still could not comprehend were happening to my dad.
Yeah.
And all the while, I could never allow my brain to complete the thought that he might die because that felt like conceding. That felt like I was going to let it happen. If I didn't say it, if I didn't beckon it into this space, then it couldn't happen. And I
Yeah.
just kept saying out loud when I would wake up from sleep. Whenever I did, I would say, "Stay, Daddy, Steve, stay, stay here, be here. You can." And I was sending all these text messages to him, believing that he would have a chance to read his phone. My daughter was sending him messages. We were calling him as a family. His incredible nurse team was holding up the phone for him to talk to us. All of us were wishing him well, telling him about what was happening and what we were doing and why we believed in him. I had a friend tell me, one of my best friends who's known me since elementary school, and she's known both of my parents. She said, "I believe your dad is with your mom right now, and they are having a very brief reunion before she tells him he has to go back, that he has to stay." It was it was such a beautiful image of my mom holding his hands in the in between and giving him a forceful push back into life because she knew he loved his life even without her. She knew how his purpose was wrapped up in his family, our family, and that he needed to stay. And I really believed that was possible.
Yeah. Well, that had to give you some immense comfort in those moments.
It did. It did. You grasped for comfort
Yeah.
everywhere. We were we were rained comfort on us. We had people in our lives, people we hadn't seen in long amounts of time, dropping off meals or sending services for meals. Someone sent coffee and breakfast, and I didn't I didn't know that a moment would come when I was not capable of making coffee or breakfast for my family, but that moment did come, and we were saved by the people around us. Coloring books were dropped off for my kids, and vegetable trays, and encouragement, words of people believing in my dad, believing in his ability to outlast and withstand. And I clung to that. I clung to that with everything.
Yeah.
So on New Year's, we were also relieved because he made it to 2021. I can remember we specifically asked his team if we could speak with him around midnight or after midnight. And when we finished that call and then had our standard family call after the call with him, my younger brother said, I'm so happy he made it to 2021. And then we all just agreed. So we had these moments of stability, and the kidneys aren't getting worse. Okay, that's good. That's one thing we can worry a tiny bit less about today. We weren't in AFib for a period of time. Looked like there were neurological responses. We were just hanging in there.
Mhm.
And the update late the night of January 3rd or very, very early the morning of January 4th was one of stability. And as the morning wore on that Monday, January 4th, I was trying to stretch out the time before we called for an update. I know shift change is busy, and we were also protecting our hearts. Every update took a level of energy and adrenaline that did something to us. And I wanted to wait, and I made myself coffee in a cactus mug. We have all these hilarious cactus stories with my dad. It felt like the right thing to do. And before I could call them, the hospital called me. And when I saw that number, I was really nervous. I thought maybe there was some critical update, not the update that it was. And when the person on the other end explained who she was talking fast, and I said, hold on, let me dial my brother in." And she said, "No, I need to say this to you first and then you can call him." And my heart just dropped because I knew what she was going to say. She said, "He's not doing well at all. His heart rate is going up and his blood pressure is dropping. We expect to lose him, and you need to come to the hospital immediately." I did not want to receive those words by myself. Not just because that's hard, but because then I had to be the one to tell my brothers that our dad was dying. I had to deliver that news that they'll never forget, just the way I can never forget that phone call. Fortunately, I was the closest one to the hospital here since he was at my house when he went to the hospital. So I got changed out of pajamas that I had been living in for weeks.
Mhm.
I thought, what do you wear to go say goodbye to someone you love the most in the world? What do you wear? Does it matter? I put on a shirt in his favorite color, red. I brought the scarf that we put on my mom's bed the day she died in 2015. I drove through waterfalls of tears while negotiating with the hospital to have a third person in the room, my other brother. I I waited for my temperature to be taken in the hospital lobby while worrying that he would die while I was waiting for that moment. I sprinted to the elevator. I ran past the doors of the birthing center where so much joy had occurred for my family, where both of my children were born. I ran past those doors to the ICU. I ran to his side and I grabbed his hands that held me, held my babies, flew airplanes, helped with homework, redlined contracts. His hands were so strong and so capable. I studied them throughout my life, and that day I couldn't stop looking at them and touching them and realizing I would never get to hold his hand again. My older brother arrived next, and as my younger brother was still getting there, we were being told that perhaps this was starting to happen, perhaps he was about to die. And so I called my brother on my phone and put it on speaker and said, I want to make sure that you're here in this room with us in case this happens in the next couple of minutes. When Brad ran in, we had more than a couple of minutes, but not long. My my older brother Alec, my younger brother Brad, and I held him. We hugged him, kissed him, we touched him, we wept. We told him how much he meant to us and why. We begged him to work with mom, to watch over us, to stay as close as he possibly could. I had to ask, is he still with us? Of his incredible nurse, Marissa, in that process. And I remember when she said yes. So I put my hand over his chest and I felt the last beats of his heart. 11/19. His birthday is November 1st, so that's the 11. My birthday is December 19th, so that's the 19. I'm always looking for alignment and signs, and I hold on to that one.
Yeah.
He died in January. My mom also died in January, and a sweet thing in our family was that she always said, "January, it's the best month of the year because it has Jan in it."
Oh.
And I thought he also he also died in January. It's already a heartbreaking month. It's almost like he arranged it so that we could get all of our heartbreaking weeping out of the way in the same month instead of having to do it multiple times. Of course, we all know that's
Yeah.
not true. You lose somebody, you can cry every day of the year.
Yeah.
I will never forget one of the few times we got to speak to a physician on the phone. He tried to be helpful and honest, and he said, "We have extubated 3 patients since the beginning of the pandemic. 3. We have taken 3 people successfully off the ventilator out of
Oh,
hundreds of patients." And my brothers and I said, "Yep, and he'll be the 4th," because that's just who my dad was. He was intense, unyielding toward a goal. He believed constantly and relentlessly in himself and others. He would never have he would never have given up, and I think it's wrong to ascribe that personality trait to COVID. It does not care who you
mhm.
are, what your beliefs are. It does not care how strong or courageous you are. It's nice to say that when someone recovers. It is nice, and I don't begrudge anyone that. But this didn't matter. It didn't matter how many prayers, how many wishes, how many text messages, how much internal will. COVID did not care.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes, and once you know that, well, with my mom, I went through the ups and downs. She's doing better. She's getting worse. She's doing better. She's getting worse. And I remember one day my sister and I, the last day we saw her at the window, we were like, well, she looks all right. She's upright. She was medicated. And and we just said, she'll be okay. We don't know who's going to come out of this at the end and how she'll be and how weak she'll be, but she's going to be okay. It looks like she's going to be fine. And then just a few days later, she died.
It's like they get this burst of
Yeah.
strength that I read in a hospice document with my maternal grandfather. He was 92, right? So that's a different situation. But it talked about people at the very end of their lives emitting a huge burst of energy, and the document presumed suggested maybe they're gathering that strength for their next journey. And I thought that was so beautiful. There's such a heartbreak in this, because with your mom and with my dad, I had hope and you had hope
Hmm.
that turned out, well, I say not to be true. Maybe we maybe we just don't know. Maybe that hope was meant to be a vessel for something else that we don't understand yet. Either it's developing inner survivability, it's an opportunity to reveal pain and heartbreak and still walking through it to others. I don't know. I don't know, but it seems too cruel for us to have had that hope and then to have had it taken away so
Yeah.
traumatically.
Do you feel any comfort thinking about your dad and your mom together again?
I do. I do. It's harder than I thought to access that comfort, because it feels that my dad was ripped away from us, that this was intentional. You can't look at cancer that way. You look at it as a terrible roll of the genetic dice, unfair, unfortunate. I can't I can't ascribe those tidy words to COVID, because it
Yeah.
feels that other people's actions, choices, and beliefs culminated in behaviors that led to uncontrolled spread, that led to his death. That is
Mhm.
the deal for me, and that part hasn't lessened or let up one bit since January
Yeah.
4th. I am comforted that they're together. He missed her, and all of the love that my brother and I could pour in with our families was still different than what it meant to my dad to be a part of Steve and Jan. And I knew on a very deep level that I could never fill that void, nor was I supposed to.
Yeah.
He and she were phenomenal partners, and he missed her. And I am very emotional when I envision what it was like for her to pull him to her side. The night before she died in January of 2015, I was with my dad at the MD Anderson intensive care unit where she was. And I had left to go home. We all agreed we needed sleep. We needed to rejuvenate ourselves so that we could fight another day ourselves, because it was really, really, really grave and difficult. And I was worried about my dad driving back the 40 or 50 minutes to his house, their house. And I had spoken with my brother about that. And my brother had the ability to use Find My iPhone for my dad's phone. And I said, "Can you do me a favor? Can
Mhm.
you just track dad for me right now? I want to make sure he's home, but I don't want to bother him in case he's sleeping." And he said, "Sure." And then he said, "Oh, well, well, that's weird. I think he left his phone at the hospital. His phone is at MD Anderson." And I said, "No, no, he didn't leave his phone." And I called my dad, and we spoke briefly, but it wasn't until over 24 hours later that I asked him again about Friday night, January 16th. And I said, "You went back. You and I were in the parking garage together. We were both getting in our cars. You went back." And he said, "Yeah, I got to Sunset Boulevard, and I I felt something. I felt her. She was pulling me back to her side. So I turned the car around and I went back. And I think about that a lot. She asked him to be with her just like it was in the beginning when it was just the two of them. She asked him to be with her one more time. And so I imagine her reaching over as my brothers and I gripped him so tightly. She gathered him into her arms and she said, "You're here now. We're together again. I've missed you. Welcome home."
Yeah.
I miss them both so much. And I
Oh,
know you and I have talked about anticipatory grief and what it means to be a person without a parent, a person without two parents, a person who's about to be without two parents, all of those things.
yeah.
It's it's intense, and it's not an experience that everyone has. To be in your 40s or 50s or younger when that is happening is a totally different situation than being in your 60s or 70s. Now, that said, if my mom or dad had been 100, it probably still would have felt too soon because
Yeah.
I adore them. And I think that's how a lot of people feel. And I'm not saying someone who loses someone when they're older than my parents were, that their loss is less valid. No, 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 no. Loss is valid to every single person. But it is still hard to exist in a world where you witness your peers with their parents in their lives having those experiences, which are now memories for you.
Yeah. When I took my dad to get his first vaccination, I saw these 2 old ladies, and, I mean, they both looked 80, 90, 100 years old, and one of them had a walker and one had a cane, and the one with the cane said, "Come on, mom, let's go over here," and they were both old enough to get their vaccine, like, that 1st of February, and I just started crying. I'm with my dad, and he's not a very emotional man, but I started crying because I was thinking, "Oh, wow, how lucky they are to have spent so much of their lives together," and I would have done that with my mom.
Of course.
Oh, yeah, it just hits you, uh, at the most random times.
Oh, the most. Parking lots,
Yeah,
drive-throughs, waiting rooms, filling out paperwork at doctors' offices. The reminders of what we have lost are everywhere. And I say that thinking back to my mom's death. Our specific loss, our COVID caused loss is a whole other trauma chapter.
yeah,
It's everywhere. We can't escape it.
yeah.
The statistics, the news. I don't even watch the news in the morning. We watch the Weather Channel, which is fantastic and much more encouraging and happier to look at beautiful scenes from all around the country and the world. But it's still inescapable, and it's inescapable all the way down to people in masks or signs on doors. It is around us, and it reminds us every day, multiple touch points within every day of what we have lost and why.
Yeah,
And that's not even to begin to scratch the surface of having to bear the weight of the opinions of others about COVID's validity. That's a whole other chapter, probably a whole other discussion. But
yeah,
that is a weight all its own. When you think my person died from this was horrific. It is horrific. And here is someone saying it's not real.
it's not real.
Makes
Yeah,
me nuclear inside. I can't. I can't. So
yeah,
we pour elsewhere, right? We hug a dog, we hug a child, we we do something. I find
mhm,
whenever I'm very angry or very sad, due to that specific thing, I tried to go do something for my dad, some act, some outreach, something. Tell someone why I love them, tip the
Hmm.
waitress the amount of the bill, something,
Yeah.
something. Avenge him with kindness.
Yeah, I find myself reaching out to people and talking more on the phone, just reaching out because my mom loved people. She loved people. She loved talking to people. She loved babies. She worked at Baby Gap so that she could see babies,
I
and she
love
worked.
that. I love that.
She did that even into her 70s, and then when Alzheimer's struck, she had to not do that anymore. But yeah, I find myself just calling my stepsisters or reaching out to people and just wanting to talk to people on the phone just to see how they're doing because my mom would have done that. And this pandemic is still going. And even though there's people who think it's over or, don't want to talk about it, like it is real right now. And
It
it's
is
still
still
happening.
real, and it's cloaked in isolation.
Yeah.
It is it is underscored with more isolation. The very human qualities of gathering together were the one thing that had to change and change immediately, and the we have lost so much. But that's only one element of the loss of this pandemic. There will be the economics nerd in me is curious about the
Mhm.
long-term effects, the data, what it will reveal about in the years to come, what it meant to be isolated, what it meant to change how we interact with others,
Yeah.
what it meant for personal responsibility to be wrapped up in others. I read an article in the Atlantic the other day, and it described our fates being inextricably linked with the choices of others. And I thought that was huge, and certainly huge for you and me.
Yeah. How are you How are you going into the holidays? 'Cause it'll be a well, I mean, just the holidays in general for you are gonna be so wrapped up in these memories of everything that happened last year. What are you, doing to get ready for that?
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a
it's
lot.
it's all these anniversaries.
Mhm.
I have all these friends I've met through this COVID loss, through hashtags on social media and grief groups, finding people who understand, and the light that I sensed from you instantly in our conversation, that connection. And I spoke with someone about all these milestones popping up and
Yeah.
how unreal they are. They were unreal after my mom, and it's true that the second year of grief is actually it's worse than the first year because
Yes.
it's true. It's actually real, and it sort of falls off of the radar of some others to love on you once you've passed that 1 year mark. That's a grief, problem that we have in the
Mhm.
US and in our culture. But for me, yes, we are upon the last bits of when it was normal and when it was okay and when there was still hope before it turned. I am determined not to hibernate in a pile of anguish, because that's what this whole year has been. I want to make intentional choices to honor him, to honor both of my parents, but my dad adored the holidays and making them special. And I feel, my brother and I are the arms of his oak tree, and we get to keep dropping those acorns and giving back and creating memories. And so
Mhm.
we're going to make the cookies. We still do gatherings at his house while we still have it. We will do a Christmas gathering at his house. We will put up his Christmas tree and decorate
Oh,
it with his Christmas ornaments. I thought it was coming down for the last time when I finally took it down in March or April, but I don't think I just don't think it can be the last time. So
Yeah.
I think we'll do it again. We are going to my younger brother's family and mine. We are going to travel to Colorado together, which is a place very special to our whole family, especially my mom and dad. We had a place in Telluride, Colorado for about 10 years while my brothers and I were kind of in high school and college and a little bit after. We're not going there. We're going nearby, and we're going to do the things that my dad would have loved. We're going to make some special memories for the kids. We're going to take a train ride. We're going to be under twinkling Christmas lights. We're going to drink hot cocoa. We're going to talk
Mhm.
about him.
Yeah, that sounds lovely. Did you have a funeral for him?
We had a very tiny funeral. That is my older brother and his family, my younger brother and his family, my family. That's it. The
Mm.
funeral home staff. The team at his hospital begged us in the minutes after he died. We were still in his room processing what had happened, talking, weeping, hugging our nurse, who again, an angel on this earth. Um, she said, please don't have a funeral. There was a family who attended a funeral for someone. While at the funeral, 4 members of that family contracted COVID. 4 of them got horribly sick. 4 of them came to our ICU. They were lined up one after the other, and all 4 of them died.
Oh.
Please don't have a funeral. And we said, of course. We were taking it seriously from the get-go. And
Mhm.
the idea of, in the midst of a terrible spread in Montgomery County and Harris County at that time around Houston, to subject anyone to risk the thing that stole my dad's very life. It was not even a consideration, but it was also heartbreaking because that is a custom, a familiar thing you do when someone dies that winds up providing a layer of closure. Not that this could be healed, but it gets you on the path of, this is the thing we do next. COVID
Mhm.
has upended all of that. What do I do
Yeah,
next? How do you do, this still doesn't feel real. We had this insane winter
yeah.
storm in Houston and in Texas in February. There was a Norman Rockwell painting on my street, and that doesn't happen here. And I thought, no more proof that my dad didn't really die, because this is too unreal. We don't get storms like this. He wouldn't die. I must be in an alternate universe.
Yeah. I have a couple of questions left. What's happening in Houston now? I mean, how do you feel like the pandemic is being handled and how things are now?
It's I say this with such caution.
Mhm.
It's getting better. People are able to be vaccinated. My dad missed that opportunity by single digit weeks. He could
Yeah.
have been vaccinated probably sometime in maybe late January or early February as someone above age 65, and that part will never get easier. But more people are able to be protected. The huge spread, the Delta variant specific spread that was taking off here in September and August, and I guess part of October, has slowed a little bit. There's hope now. Children, above the age of 5 can be vaccinated. I learned I learned on my dad's birthday on November 1st that my 6-year-old daughter, who has been in a vaccine trial, I learned that I could unblind her results and found out that she received the actual vaccine and not the placebo. So, one of my 2 kids has been more protected. That gives me hope, and it gives me hope imagining that feeling of just a little bit of relief for others.
Yeah.
I think it's been handled in some ways well, and in other ways very poorly. I've seen leaders say they will trust Texans to do the right thing and make the right choices. And I can't agree with that at all, because those choices in my local community included people proud of not masking and gathering and not taking COVID seriously. And those things directly contributed to an out of control spread, which
Yeah.
brought COVID to my family, which took my dad's life. So as it gets better, I'm relieved. I'm happy. Imagining someone like my mom, who is so immunocompromised with a donated organ in her body, I don't know if she could have been vaccinated. And so
Mhm.
to imagine someone like my mom, who was as important as my mom was to me, who is that important to someone else, that person being more protected now as people around them can be vaccinated.
Yeah.
I'm happy for them. I don't begrudge anyone that sense of relief or hope, despite the fact that my dad is gone, and gone because of COVID, and indirectly because of the actions of others.
Yeah. One last question. Have you participated in any of the COVID memorials? Sent in your dad's name?
Yes, I did. I sent in his name for the COVID flags.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
I let's see. There's another there oh, that's what I wanted to tell you about. There was a COVID art exhibit here in Houston. An artist, Joni Zavitstanos, she created something called Living Icons, and interacted with Houstonians, families, those in Houston who had lost their lives to COVID. Because my dad's story about being an angel flight pilot for cancer patients ran in the Houston Chronicle in the paper, she
Oh.
contacted our family and asked if my dad could be included in her art exhibit. And it it opened on October 16th. We had a chance on October 15th to attend a private family showing at the Health Museum in Houston. We have a thriving, awesome museum district in Houston. There's a place my dad loved. And the last time, we had all been there together as a family was was January 4th of 2020. It was
Oh, wow.
one day, after the private family event, my brother and I decided we would go to the restaurant we had gone to with my dad the last time we were all there. And as we sat at the same table where we sat with him, we all pulled out our phones to find out who had taken the picture of all of us together. And then we looked at the timestamp, and we all fell silent. It was January 4th of 2020. We had 365 days left with him from that moment, and we didn't know. We didn't
Mhm.
know. The art exhibition was incredible. It featured photographs, and Joni, the artist, had a gorgeous golden halo drawn above every single person. In some cases, the photo submitted was a couple, it was two people, it was parents, and that rips your heart out. It just rips
Mhm.
your heart out. And as we stood there among all those people, my brother said to me, "Everyone here understands our pain. Everyone here understands our specific trauma. They
Yeah.
went through it too." Just like you and I talked about what it feels
Mhm.
like to be seen, to be understood with a COVID loss. It's
Yeah.
about the only good thing to come out of this.
Yeah. So your dad flew angel flights for people who had cancer.
He did. He loved flying. He was a college student when he got his pilot's license, and then he became a flight instructor. That was how he paid his way through law school. He would ride his bicycle to the airport to give he didn't have a car. He would ride his bicycle to the airport at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. So special whenever we flew in there together, because I could picture him. He took my mom in a plane on their second date in
Oh.
1963. Um, she knew he was all about adventure right then, and I'm pretty sure that's what grabbed her. He adored flying and thought he might do it for a career. He did hold on to law school, became an attorney, had a fulfilling and wonderful career, and he was great at it. But he never gave up flying. He and my mom owned 3 different aircraft together over their lives, and the last plane that he had, she had been incorrectly diagnosed with liver cancer for a brief period of time before it turned out it was, just a blood clot that would require a liver transplant. And in that moment, they hesitated about selling their existing plane and buying the new one. And and she was the one who said, "No, let's do this. Let's do this. If we're learning anything, it's that time is way shorter than we want it to be. Let's buy the plane. Let's take the trips. Let's do this." And they did.
Yeah.
And it's been a major anchor in our family's lives. My husband and I loved traveling with my parents. I still have a dream of getting a pilot's license. It's not too late. And when my mom died, my dad thought for a moment that maybe it was time to stop flying. Maybe that chapter of his life was over. And I asked him, and my husband asked him to not make that decision just yet. We hoped to fly with our daughter. We named her Amelia, partly because I have always admired Amelia Earhart, and to honor my dad, as a pilot, that was so important to me to name her that. And I wanted our Amelia to fly in his plane, with him in the left
Mhm.
seat. And we did, and she did, and she flew in that seat with him, and we took so many trips. And in between our trips together, he said, I have been given the opportunity to be a steward of these resources. I'm a lifetime pilot. I have access to a comfortable plane that can fly faster based on the upgrades I have made to it. Had jet engine. I can help somebody, and I need to fly. I need to fly often to stay sharp, to be safe. So,
Yeah.
how can I combine all those feelings into something bigger? And some of my parents' best friends told my dad about Angel Flight, which is helping people get to or from Houston for cancer treatment at MD Anderson, because not everyone who has cancer and needs treatment at such a major institution is based in the area. And there are people in Arkansas or Mississippi or Louisiana or far west Texas. And getting to treatment could mean an expensive plane ticket or a 12-hour Greyhound bus ride. And so that's where my dad and other Angel Flight pilots came in. They help either do a relay where multiple people, someone takes the first leg, to a midpoint, and my dad would take the midpoint leg back to Houston or vice versa. He flew 47 missions starting
Mm.
in July of 2015. My mom died in January of 2015. He did his first flight in July, just after my daughter was born. And then the first patient he ever flew had myelofibrosis, the same cancer my mom did.
Wow, the synchronicities that you have going on in your life, they're astounding.
They are. I reach for them. They tell me that it doesn't stop when earthly life ends. It tells me there's more, there's connections. I'm always tracking the flights that fly overhead to see if there's something about the type of aircraft or the tail number or the destination, something that means more than just a plane flying overhead. And it is a comfort. My dad made people's lives easier, and I got to fly on some of those Angel Flight missions too as a mission assistant. I would tell the person flying who wasn't necessarily, familiar with flying in a small plane, share with them what was happening, what to expect. When once we take off, this is how it's going to feel. This is expected to take this amount of time. And it was a pleasure to have my tiny daughter, and then later my daughter and my son along, and to have hope for these people, remembering the hope that we had for my mom. something that just encapsulates who my dad is. And I can't tell you about Angel Flight without telling you about this. There was someone going back home to Wichita Falls in Texas, and my dad flew them back home. And as he was finishing up with them at that airport, he said, "And you've got a ride? Your person is coming to get you?" And the cancer patient said, "Oh, yes, but they're working, and they won't be here until they can get off work. So 5:30, but it's good. I've got my phone, and there's coffee here at the airport, and it'll be all right." It was about 11:30 a.m. And my
Oh.
dad said, "Oh, no, 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 we can do better than that." And a wonderful thing that happens at small airports, fixed base operators, is there's often two pilots, the use of something called a courtesy car. Sometimes a courtesy car is just a run-of-the-mill sedan. Sometimes it's like an old police car from decades ago. We have ridden in all kinds of courtesy cars in my life. And my dad borrowed the courtesy car at the Wichita Falls airport. He took the patient back to their home so that they did not have to wait for hours for a ride after enduring cancer treatment. And then he flew home and told me about it. And
Oh.
I felt like nothing could wrap up better who he was. He would always be ready to do, we can do better than that. We can help.
Mhm.
We can do that. Let's do that.
Yeah.
And that's who Steve Wright was and is and will always be. He was an encourager. Love was a verb for him. It was an action. It was a constant action with his grandchildren, with his children, with his friends, with people he advised, with people he supported, with causes he supported.
Mhm. Thank you so much for sharing his story.
Thank you for giving me a venue and a place to feel seen and understood and validated. And thank you for letting me share his spirit and his story. That's probably one of the biggest things in death, isn't it? That
Mhm.
you're afraid that their story stops because they're not here.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be over. And so if I keep telling it and I keep embodying the best parts of him, the parts that uplifted others, then his story really can't be over. It doesn't have to be over.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Cathy. I appreciate it.
Jennifer, thank you. Thank you for your time. And I'm incredibly grateful for this conversation. And please know that you will always have an empathetic heart in me to talk about what we've lost and who we've lost.
And that's the show, everyone. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com. If you like this episode, please share the show. Share it with your friends, share it on your social media, and once you've done that, rate and review this podcast on your favorite listening platform. And then go rate it on Apple Podcast, because that's where most of our new listeners come from. Ratings and reviews are the main way this podcast finds new listeners. So please share the show. Until next time.